Good evening. I am honored to be here. I'd like to thank Dan Cathy and the other hosts for having me. And before I get started, I'd like to dedicate this to the late civil rights leader, legend Lonnie King Jr., and the late councilman, Ivory Lee Young Jr. In preparation for tonight, I sat down with my 91-year-old neighbor, Miss Arian Johnston, and I asked her how she would describe the West Side of decades ago. Recollecting her almost 60 years in the neighborhood, she chronicled an imperfect but certainly dignified space with a Southern combination of soul and intellectual substance flavored West Side culture and would help to make Atlanta the pride of Black America. Mahalia Jackson and Lady Day hummed through the window panes. The philosophies of Washington and Du Bois were still debated in earnest in barbershops and fellowship halls. Education was the key from sharecropping to the AUC, and faith held the Black community together when our leaders were murdered and our hopes were dashed. But when drugs conspicuously flooded the streets and fatherlessness reigned, the rhythm changed. The causes and aspirations were diverted. Sisters like Claudia Bell Kemp took in generations of children, some of them drug-addicted babies, who were dropped off at her doorstep without a lot of resources, just a big heart and an enduring faith. Make no mistake, the talent and ingenuity have always been here. But when the rich soil of the West Side turned to concrete, the grassroots struggled to grow. And many of them still do today, which brings us here. In a very transient and self-concerned age where we can curate our environment and our own image, it seems community is hopelessly relegated to lifestyle enclaves where we can limit our personal interactions to those who share our taste and would never offend our sensibilities. It's consigned to virtual communities of confirmation bias where we can simply cancel and exclude those who disagree with our beliefs. But I believe that we are still obligated to aspire to something much more dynamic, a beloved community where we set aside our hang-ups and risk being offended to pursue something much greater than maintaining our comfort zones. Stewarding human dignity is a community prerogative, meaning the community must weigh in. It must have the first vote when it comes to protecting the dignity of our neighbors, creating places where the well-being of others is pursued, not because they have the right cultural or political views, but simply because their humanity makes them worth our time and resources. Despite our differences, we must find common ground on a higher principle and exercise a community prerogative. You see, this gathering speaks volumes, number one, because it's voluntary. So many of our disputes are about what can and can't be imposed on us. But tonight we're deciding what standards and expectations we'll impose on ourselves. And the burdens that we freely accept for the sake of others reveal who we really are. You see, in beloved community, the fortunate deliberately refuse to insulate and distance themselves from the less fortunate. Every disparity is taken personally. The cries of our suffering neighbors not only demand our attention, but a voluntary corporate suffering that necessitates action. We spend most of our lives shielding ourselves from suffering, but the paradox of beloved community is that it calls for us to voluntarily share in the pain of our neighbors. And when you share in another's pain, you have the strongest motive to alleviate it. Sure, there's a time and a place for debate, for spirited deliberation. Conflict can be constructive. The examination and cross-examination of certain assumptions is essential to democracy. But today's topic must be a consensus of first principles. We don't have to go back and forth about the merits of free markets versus Keynesian economics, about foreign policy isolationism versus globalism. The question here is more direct yet transcendent. Is your neighbor worth it? Lay down your partisan flags, remove your ideological insignia because they're no good here tonight. They can only serve to distract and complicate an otherwise clear community prerogative. This is a matter of the heart. It's a test of the spirit of the Atlanta community. When Congress is at an impasse and national leaders are play-acting in political theater, the community has no such luxury. We don't have that convenience. The community must continue to work. It must continue to serve its purpose. to look after and tend to human dignity unconditionally, to say that our neighbors can only go so low, that the poor will not be gentrified out of our neighborhoods. And fortunately, this is a subject to which there's no need for external approvals. In this space, the community is sovereign, free, yet accountable. There's no one to wait on and no one to blame. All the authority, experience, resources, and brain power necessary have been brought to bear tonight. So either we get it done or we don't, but we can only point the finger in the mirror. On their third album, Giboney, Atlanta's poet laureates Outkast had a song by the same name that in a way speaks to the state of the West Side. And let me tell you, it was a beautiful but melancholy social commentary about suffering and the uncertainty of the human condition. Andre 3000 waxed poetic with a heartbreaking illustration. He said, it's them poor babies walking slowly to the candy lady. It's looking bad, need some hope, like the words maybe, if, or probably. The wit here is in the simplicity. Upon reflection, it becomes clear to the listener that he's referring to children with broken spirits. Children are by nature resilient and hopeful. They certainly don't walk slowly to the candy lady, but if they do, we know something has gone horribly wrong, and it's a grand indictment on the community. Not just their next door neighbor, but the neighbor across the tracks, who's enjoying the delicacies of cosmopolitan life with no regard for their suffering. Don't you know these children are wrestling with the daily indignities of poverty and with questions that confound academics? What to do when right doesn't seem to be rewarded by sustenance? How do you reconcile that getting what the world says is valuable often means devaluing your body or violating your neighbor? See, if we really want Dr. King's beloved community to exist, we have to start seeing what Claudia Bell Kemp saw when she looked into the eyes of a drug-addicted baby. A baby with all the odds against it before it's even made one decision for itself. Now, when you're confronted with that type of reality, your response says everything about you. You can see it as a product of an arbitrarily cruel world, give up hope, and join the chaos. You can blame the parents, the race, the culture, and excuse yourself from the discussion. Or you can understand that God has placed a person in your sphere of influence that needs you to help change the equation, to heal a broken narrative. One of those drug-addicted babies raised by Claudia Bell Kemp is here with us tonight. LaTanya Johnston took one of the West Side's most notorious drug houses and converted it into Paw Kids, a place where neighborhood children get after-school programs, tutoring, love, and discipline. Not pity. Pity can be cheap and distant. We're talking about dignity here. Listen, there are no technologies or innovations to successfully replace or circumvent community. There's no profit motive that can sustain it. It's a matter of self-sacrifice. It can't be compelled. Some of you will leave here saying, I gave more than I expected to give. I dug deeper than I expected to dig. And that's all right. That's all right. Because that's the only way beloved community can be possible. God bless you.